Tanse everyone, I'm Dallas and we're back with Create to Learn Round 2. This is the second part of a 4-video series aimed towards prototyping in augmented reality using Unity. We're using the Unity and Vuforia combo, and today we're focused entirely on decorating our prototype from a visual standpoint. So once again, I couldn't have done this tutorial series alone. These videos are made for the Create to Learn initiative between Taking It Global and Imaginative. Follow Create to Learn's Instagram or the hashtag Create2Learn to find more series that teach you digital skills. This series is produced in Brandon, Manitoba on Treaty 2 territory. The land here is the traditional land of the Cree, Oji-Cree, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples. It's also the homeland of the Métis Nation. This treaty was made in 1871, and you can learn even more by visiting trcm.ca. Alright, let's get creating. So in this part, we're going to take our digital paint brushes inside of Unity to make a visually striking augmented reality prototype. We're going to take advantage of Unity's particle system and lights, and get more comfortable with the engine. For this part, the only optional need you could use is a photo editing software, and this is only necessary depending on the image you're augmenting and the style you're wanting to go for. You could totally keep it all inside Unity if you wanted to. So first, I want to begin brainstorming an idea for augmented reality. I want my augmentation to be related to the image that I'm tracking. So, this tin box has 5 awesomely designed creatures on it that are kind of like bugs. And bugs crawl and move around and stuff like that. Aside from that, I see the colors of the tin box are relatively vibrant and thick, so my style should try and reflect that. If you're wanting to get some ideas on what you could do in augmented reality, consider getting a pencil and paper and drawing out an idea or two of what you'd like to see. I'll give you some guidance as to what, is feasible for this series. Imagine that we're going to be using our image as the flooring of a fish tank or the bottom of a jar. So consider, do you want to display 3D models or 2D images within this fish tank? Where are you going to get those models or images from? And where are you going to put them? How could you use lights? Do you want to light up a specific area of the fish tank and create some cool looking shadows? How do you want the piece to move? Do you want the image itself to move slightly, or the augmentation to move in some way? Keep in mind that nothing has to move in groups, so that you could have game objects moving in different directions and doing different things. Also, consider the space you're working with and aim to keep it inside of this imaginary fish tank. The reason I say this is because if you have to move the webcam to see everything you've made and you end up losing sight of the original image you're trying to track, your augmentation is going to get lost. So it's best to avoid that scenario. And lastly, if you could add an invisible button to your fish tank, a button that would make your fish tank do something visually, what would you want that to be? So with that discussed, begin brainstorming with a pen and paper, and I'll show you what I've come up with. Alrighty, so in my fish tank, I want my creatures to emerge from the floor and move a little bit. Perhaps I'll move them in a circle around the pencil tin box itself. While this is happening, I want the edges of my image to have particles emitting. I don't know why, I just think it's stylish. I'd also like an invisible light to be placed above my piece and to have its color change over time, to sort of convey the passing of time. I want to add a button to one of these creatures on my tin box, and when I press it, have the bugs scurry around the container. Then I'll add buttons on the screen of my phone so that when I press them, the bugs release particles. There's a ton of stuff we can learn from this, and a ton of time it's going to take to make it happen. So let's get started. First, I'm going to get the optional task done using my photo editor. If I want these bugs to move on their own, I have to separate them from the image they're a part of. In order to do this, I'm going to use paint.net, a free alternative to Photoshop, and one of many out there that can do what I'm looking to do. First, I'm going to take the photo I'm using for prototyping. Then, I'm going to crop the image so that I can only see one of the bugs. The next bit is relatively easy because the bug is surrounded in a sea of green. For this, I can use paint.net's magic wand tool, which can select many pixels at once, if they're close in terms of color. If I click on a green pixel, tons of green pixels will be selected. Then I delete them using the delete key on my keyboard. I repeat this step until only my bug is there with a checkerboard pattern beneath it. The checkerboard pattern means that there is actually no pixels there, and so I'll be able to see through this image inside of Unity. Once I'm done, I can go to File and select Save As. And make sure to save the image as a PNG so that I can have these see-through pixels stay there. With my bug separated, I'm going to get the rest of its family. Groovy. So I got all my bugs into separate images. Now, I want to put these new images I've made and drag them inside of Unity, but to keep things organized, I'm going to create a folder. In the project window, I'm going to right-click, go to Create, and then click on Folder. That just makes a new one for me, which I can then rename to Pictures. This will be where I place my bugs. So, just like last time, I'm going to find the photos in my computer and drag them over to Unity. But something is different this time. The pixels surrounding the bugs are black instead of a checkerboard pattern. Why is that? Well, these pictures were turned into textures instead of sprites. To clarify, sprites are images that are made of pixels. Pixels are squares that come in many different colors, and so many pixels can eventually comprise a flat image when there's enough of them. Sort of like this video you're watching now, it's been compressed into a bunch of pixels. So textures, on the other hand, are made to wrap around a 3D model, like a sphere or cube. My bugs are sprites made of pixels, which were then converted to wrap around a 3D model. But since there's no pixels surrounding the bugs, Unity turned that empty space into black pixels, and you'll notice that I can't even make a game object out of it. I'm going to make a 3D plane, which is really just one side of a dice block. Right-click in the scene hierarchy, 3D object, plane, and I think there's an important lesson here. So this plane, everything listed in the scene hierarchy, is a game object. Game objects exist somewhere in this level within our app. Each game object starts off as a blank piece of information. They don't do anything until they're given components, and components are listed in the inspector. These bolded headers indicate different components, of which Unity has many. Typical 3D game objects are going to have a transform. A transform is a component that stores info related to where the object is located, its rotation, and its size. That's just a helpful bit of knowledge that I think is going to help us along the way here. So this plane has a texture wrapped around it, a default one. So now I can put my bug texture over it. I do this by clicking on my bug in the project window and dragging over the plane 3D model. So cool. The bug is wrapped around this plane. This created a new material we can see. Materials are used to render or display 3D models in Unity in a bunch of magnificent different ways. Feel free to play around with these settings, as there's a ton of stylistic freedom you're given here. In my case, making changes alters how my bug is rendered in Unity, but I can change the way that Unity handles the black pixels. I can instead make those black pixels transparent, see-through. By going to the Creature 1 material, I can change the rendering mode from opaque to cutout, which will allow me to use my transparent pixels. You'll notice that I can't see the bug from underneath due to the 3D plane only being visible from one side. The next thing we can do is have our image visible from both sides. I'll go to the image of a bug and change its material type from a 2D texture to a sprite. Doing so allows me to click and drag the bug into the scene hierarchy since it doesn't need a 3D model to wrap around. It's independent. Making a game object out of it shows me that the sprite bug has a sprite renderer component. This component allows me to change its colors, generally a lot less settings than if it were a 2D texture, but only because I'm currently viewing it through the scene hierarchy and not through the project window. So, with that out of the way, I challenge you to begin placing your props, whether they're 3D models or 2D sprites, and afterwards, we'll get to placing cool particles in our augmentation. Alrighty, so I placed all my bugs over top of the image I'm tracking. Now I want to place a particle system that spawns particles at the edge of this flat rectangle that I have. To make a particle system, right-click in the scene hierarchy, Effect, Particle System. This creates a new game object for us, the powerful, beautiful, complicated particle system. Right off the bat, we can see a ton of fuzzy white particles emerging from a center point and moving upward in a cone-like shape. Everything about this we can change, from how the particles spawn, how they look, and where they go. I'll slowly go through everything that I would normally change about a particle system. So first, the duration. It's currently set for 5 seconds. This is only really changed when the particle system isn't set to loop over and over again, just like this one is. You turn this off for like a one-time explosion or something. Start lifetime refers to how long each particle lives for. I'll set this to 3 seconds. Next is start speed, which is how fast the particles move in their respective directions. I don't want my particle system to be particularly distracting, so I'm going to tweak this as we go along. Start size is how big each particle spawns at. If you want them bigger, make this number bigger. Next is start color, which makes a large impact. It essentially lays a color over each particle, and we can totally tweak this as we go on. We can also change how the colors are distributed among each particle. Click on the triangle beside the color bar, and you'll be given some options to choose from. I want to set the color of the particles to cycle randomly between 2 different colors. Next up is the gravity modifier. The higher this number, the higher the force of gravity placed on each particle. This is handy if you want to make like a space-themed augmentation. I'd tweak the start speed along with this and make something cool out of it. The simulation space is easier explained through demonstration. Currently, it is set to local space, which is similar to the child-parent concept discussed earlier, where the game object moves, so too do the particles. Setting this to world space, however, will enable the particles to move independently after emerging, so even if the parent moves, the children will move in their own direction. Last thing I'd tweak in this section is the max particles. This number basically tells Unity how many particles can be made at once. Scrolling further down, we can see the emission tab of the particle system, which allows us to spawn particles at a faster rate over time. Currently, it's set to spawn 10 every second, but you can tweak this number until your heart is content. Scrolling down to the Shape tab, we can change the cone that our particles currently move in. In my case, I'm going to change this from a cone to a box. This box is rather tall by default, so I'm going to change my scale from 1 all across the X, Y, and Z axis to something that more accurately reflects my image target. Once again, I want to center these particles around the edge of my image. Currently, the particles spawn all across this rectangle I've made, but I can go to the Emit From option and change it from volume to edge, so that the particles won't spawn from the entirety of the box, but only its edges. I'm going to make some changes to the size of these particles and their speed and gravity. Almost there for the particles. I'm going to scroll further down to size over lifetime. This can change the size of the particles as they exist. This is done through a graph with a curving line. The higher this line is in the graph, the bigger the particle will be at that specific time of its life. At the bottom right corner of Unity, there's handy presets made for this graph. Feel free to test whichever you'd like. I personally love when particles start out big, but then get smaller over time, sort of like a campfire's ashes. And then lastly, we can scroll down to the Renderer tab. This lets us change how these particles look inside of Unity, sort of like earlier with the bugs as a texture or sprite. The most impactful thing to do is change the material. Currently, the material is set to a default cotton-looking image. I can change this to a different sprite and a different texture material. Changing this material to a bug sprite makes this particle system look extremely off-putting, so instead I'm going to use the default line material to get beautiful blank squares. Awesome, I dig these particles. And to move them alongside my image target, I'm going to the scene hierarchy and moving my particle system game object underneath my pencil box parent. Now everything's together. Now up for lights. There's a ton that Unity has in terms of lights. In the scene hierarchy, right click, lights. And now I'm selecting spotlight. Much like the sprite renderer from before, we can change some things. Range determines how far the light reaches. Spot angle changes how wide the spotlight will be, so a higher number makes a wider cone. Color changes the color this light emits. And finally, intensity changes how strong this light is within its given range. So right now, I can see that making changes isn't actually lighting my image any differently. So to investigate, I've selected my pencil box game object, the image I'm tracking, within the scene hierarchy, and I'm checking out its material in the inspector. I see that Vuforia, by default, set my pencil box to be an unlit material, so lights won't impact it. I can change this by selecting the shader type, which is unlit/texture, and change it to Unity standard shader. And I can visualize my light properly. That's super neat. So now the stage has been set. I have images of bugs, particles, and a cool light above them all. Awesome. We have a lit scene, and it's going to be pretty awesome to make things happen with it in the next episode. So later on, we're going to learn more about Unity's animation system, and we're going to be adding a virtual button, which should be exciting. We'll see you there.